Today we're here with writer Martina Devlin after her participation in ISLA Festival. Thank you, Martina, for joining us. Thanks for this interview. I wanted to talk about Sisterland, your most recent book. I wanted to know, while I was reading, what did come first, Sisterland as a world or Constance's story?
Sisterland came first.
Okay.
It was a world that came to me very quickly. I just imagined this world set in the near future, about 100 years in advance. And then when the world was real to me, I thought, what kind of people would live in it?
Okay. I've heard you saying that you were inspired by Herland.
Yes, well done.
What is the inspiration that you brought? What is the reach of that inspiration that you brought into the novel?
So Herland is a novel I read quite a while ago, and I always remembered it. It was published in 1915 by an activist, feminist campaigner called Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And she envisaged a world where women would have economic independence, which sounds so what now, but at the time it was revolutionary. And she wrote a book, Herland, in which 3 men go up the Amazon and stumble on a lost tribe. And it's quite funny. Generally, Charlotte is not a funny writer. You know, she's quite finger-waggy on lots of things. It was the style of the day. And she had a lot of things to be annoyed about. But Herland is really very funny because the 3 men struggle to believe that a world entirely run by women could be efficient. And in fact, not only is it efficient, it's better than the world they've just left. So I thought I would like to take it on a step. And what would my version of Herland be like? And I called it Sisterland. But rather to my surprise, when I sat down and started writing, Sisterland wasn't a utopia. Quite the reverse, it was a dystopia. And honesty made me come to that conclusion. I realized that women are first and foremost human beings, and human beings are prey to a particular set of faults. So the main one being, I've noticed that as soon as people get their hands on the levers of power, they change. I think they become mentally deranged, and they stop taking advice. They believe they're always right. They're convinced they have the answer to everything. It's ivory towerism at its extreme. So Sisterland really could not be perfect because the women who ran it would be prey to the same mistakes.
You were mentioning in the panel earlier on that, well, basically I wanted to ask you, because your fiction is mostly historical, or that's what I understand.
Yes.
And there's a lot of research on that. And you were mentioning in the panel that it wasn't that difficult for you to imagine this world because you grew up in Northern Ireland.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you, what was the difference between this creative work and your other fiction that will be more relying more in research? What was different in this process for you?
Well, I guess really it's more a question of what was the same for me, in the sense that with all stories, whether they're set in the past, the present, or the future, you adopt a position and you argue it. Okay? And for me, whatever the time frame of the novel, I'm always writing about the future, really. So Sisterland is about now, really, and what's happening in the world around us now. And it was the same with historical novels. One that comes to mind is The House Where It Happened, which is set in 1711. It's about a witchcraft trial, the last conviction for witchcraft in Ireland. And it was a group witchcraft trial, so 8 women were convicted on the uncorroborated testimony of 1 woman. Okay? And with that, I was talking about how we think witchcraft is medieval, but in fact, all societies have their witches. They just call them by different names. They call them asylum seekers, they call them travelers, they call them people who are different.
I was actually reading recently one of your books, one of your not that recent ones, Ship of Dreams. And there's a lot of arranged marriages and kind of high society in America. There's a lot of reflection of that. And it got me thinking about how basically intergender relationships are very, very well described and kind of unsettling in dystopian novels. It happens in Handmaid's Tale, where the ritual, it's actually very, very unsettling to read about it. And it happens in in hymn time, in the mating place. Do you think the way we relate to each other, like in between genders or kind of relationships, is a barometer of dysfunctional societies? Is that, basically?
So I would call myself a feminist. Equally, I could call myself an equalist. And with About Sisterland, what interests me is the risk of the oppressed when they're liberated becoming the oppressor. And you see that in other societies. So the women in Sisterland had been oppressed. When they had an opportunity, instead of being conciliatory, they
turn things around
exactly.
and kind of revert things to the way they were for them.
They made beasts of burden for the men, and they made them simply means to have children. Obviously, I don't think either of these situations is ideal, which brings me back to the equalism. And I'm quite disappointed as a woman to see how slow equality has been coming. Ostensibly, everything is fine because we have the vote, but there are still many ways in which women's voices aren't heard, in which women are literally silenced. There is a character in the novel called Silence, and that's not a coincidence. I feel that women's voices are silenced. I know I'm here talking away, but generally, in a public forum, it's quite difficult for women to make their points. There are issues of confidence, for example. I heard recently an interview where Michelle Obama was talking about imposter syndrome, where she said that she's listening to men talk and she thinks, hang on, he's an imposter. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. But she said it's harder for women to have the confidence to just stand up and talk about something unless they feel they've got all the notes and every possible angle covered.
I was actually wondering in this in this digital society and thinking about the arranged marriages that we were talking about in Ship of Dreams. Are we kind of walking towards arranged marriages, but by algorithms and by kind of external and digital factors or actors there?
No, I think love will always out.
That's a very positive outcome, yeah.
Yeah, I think people resist being corralled, and people resist being told how they should feel. I think there's an innate wellspring in the human beast that makes him or her just have this urge to go their own way. And look, there were arranged marriages in the past, loveless marriages.
Yeah.
In Ireland, right up until the 40s and 50s, it was quite common for old farmers to marry young girls. It was not uncommon for all sorts of historical reasons. Women had no option but to emigrate if they didn't want that future.
And you were mentioning earlier on about giving up your job just not that long ago in Ireland. When
yes, until the
married.
1970s, the
Yeah.
marriage bar.
Yeah, my mother-in-law told me this story recently, and I just couldn't believe it, because it's so alien to me that you will have to.
You had to give up work.
Yeah.
It was, there weren't enough jobs to go around, therefore they had to be kept for men, which is fine if the man is able to keep his family and so forth. What about widows? What about single women? It was quite restrictive. It does not reflect well on Irish society. It does not reflect well on trade unions, which didn't challenge this. But there were other elements of Irish society which were really about pushing women back into the kitchen and really into the private space, not to have a part in not to have a part in public life. There were all sorts, exemption from jury service. When the police force and army were set up in Irish society, women didn't join as full members. And yes, the marriage bar. And another really restrictive element was equal pay. You didn't get equal pay for doing the same job. And in fact, it was only when Ireland joined the European Union that Europe wagged the finger, and quite right too, at Irish legislators and said equal pay for equal work. And Ireland held off for a couple of years because the employers said they couldn't possibly afford to pay women the same as men. They'd all go out of business. But Europe insisted. So that was the first piece of legislation that was introduced after Ireland joined the European Union in the early 1970s. And it does sound like a distant age. Contraception. When I was a student, when I was a student, contraception was illegal. I am from the north of Ireland, went to college in Dublin, and my classmates would say to me, "Can you bring condoms?" Now, the problem with that is I came from a small town.
And the pharmacist knew who you were exactly.
You couldn't buy condoms in a machine as you do now. You had to queue up in a pharmacy and ask the pharmacist, who had known me since I was a baby. So I said to my trying to be cool, and then the students say, "Can you bring down condoms?" And I said, "But the chemist would tell my daddy." I can't possibly. So there were all sorts of strange rules which were picked away, in my living memory. Another one was that women couldn't order a pint of beer in a pub. They could only be served a half pint.
Oh.
So that had to be done away with.
Apart from being in this area,
snugs, yes, the ladies' bar, but you couldn't order a pint of beer. Divorce was introduced, and contraception was banned in the new state. And why I find this so very disappointing is because Ireland was formed on the basis of a revolution less than 100 years ago. And women were part of that revolution. Women fought in that revolution.
It happened the same in Spain with the Republic,
Yes, and women were an equal part of it.
And equal partners,
And they were as at risk of dying in the revolution as men, and their principles were no less dearly held. And there were super revolutionary men who got it and supported them, but they were the ones who tended to be executed or to die in the War of Independence and the Civil War that followed. And it was a reactionary group of highly conservative young men who were low down the pecking order in terms of the revolution, who got their hands on power and who immediately started pushing the women away. A book was written about it called Unmanageable Revolutionaries, referring to the women, and that's an actual quote from one of the male leaders. Those women are unmanageable.
I think you're a natural storyteller, but you need to be told so. But what does the political commentary, bring to your day life as a writer? Because you're very passionate about political references, about history.
Yes, I'm interested in politics, yes. Well, look, anybody who grows up in the north of Ireland is interested in politics. I saw politics all around me, and I saw politics work. I grew up in a divided society where there was a civil war. outside my front door. Okay? And that was my norm. And somewhere inside me, I don't know how, I realized that that wasn't everyone else's norm. You know, I realized it was abnormal. Perhaps it was my parents trying to give us as normal a life as possible. I want to tell you a story, if I may, since
Please,
you've
yes.
mentioned storytelling. When I was about 8 or 9, I was taken on a day trip to a town near Belfast called Lurgan.
Okay.
Now, I grew up in Omagh where there wasn't too much trouble, okay? But Lurgan, there was a lot of trouble. And I was brought up on a Sunday morning. And on Saturday nights in Lurgan, there would be riots, right? So we arrive at this house and I'm sent out to play with a little girl the same age as me. We're told, go to the playground. I go outside and she says to me, we're not going to the playground. I've got somewhere better to bring you. So she brought me to this place where there was glass everywhere on the ground. All the windows were smashed. And it was clearly where there had been a riot the night before. And she starts rooting through the glass saying, look, there's money here waiting, no, begging to be picked up. And it was 50p coins. She started rooting and finding these 50p coins. Now, when I was a little girl, 50p, 50 pence, it would have bought you like lots of sweets, lots of sweets. And she's picking up these 50p coins. And the thing about a 50p coin is it had all these sides, okay? It had edges. Okay. It had like about 5 sides to it. And the rioters were taking them and throwing them at the windows with some force and smashing the windows. But to the child, it was nirvana.
A treasure, yeah.
It was nirvana. So anyway, we find these coins and I thought, oh, this girl is so cool. We'll be friends forever. I'm this little country bumpkin and she knows how to find money lying in the streets. So anyway, I'm brought back. It was friends of the family who brought me there. I'm brought back at the end of the day and handed over to my parents. And I say to my parents, this place, Lurgan, is great. They have riots there. And I say, isn't it an awful pity Omagh couldn't have a few riots? And my parents are furious. You know, they do that thing where your parents look at each other. And then I was marched into the front room where there was a trochra box, like a charity box. And I was made put all my money into the charity box. And then I was told I was never going to Larne again. Never seeing that girl again, and that was the end of my experience with riots.
And did they explain to you why I was wrong at the time? Or
they kind of said that I should be very grateful that I lived in a town where people knew that rioting was wrong, and I didn't see rioting. Yeah. I just saw the aftermath.
So you couldn't.
But then as a journalist, years later, I did find when I was covering the troubles in the North, I did find myself in riot situations, which are very frightening. And can I say, I thought about it again quite recently when I saw scenes from Spain, from Catalonia, when I saw people on the streets, police coming at them, riot police, and lining up. And I remembered being a young journalist and being in Belfast.
And a frightening experience.
And it's quite frightening. Especially, I remembered it brought flashbacks for me when riot police start charging. They don't say to themselves, there's a journalist, we won't mind about her. They just come at you and you're trampled underfoot, you know?
You're just somebody else there marching, basically. You're not different to anybody marching.
No, exactly. You're no different. You don't have a sign saying, you know,
don't hit me, I'm just here boarding.
So it reminded me of that. But I think the other reason I'm interested in politics is I saw it work. I saw politics work in Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement delivered peace. It's not ideal. There are problems. Stormont isn't sitting at the moment. But it is so much better than what went before. You know, there's no comparison.
So you believe in the power of politics.
So I believe in politics. Yeah. I believe in jaw in dialogue.
In discussion,
in dialogue, discussion. And the thing about discussion and dialogue is it means that it's accommodations. You have to surrender some of your demands or your wish list. You don't get everything you want. And I would love someone to say that in Spain at the minute. Dialogue and surrender some of your demands. And international mediation. I really believe in that. We saw the benefit of that in Ireland when there was a US Special Envoy, George Mitchell. Outsiders come in. And sometimes you do need an independent
someone that has a different point of view, and someone that doesn't hold a grudge, or someone that doesn't have that passion about what they're believing in both sides.
Because just wants a settlement.
Yeah, settlement.
A settlement is not going to be ideal for everybody.
Yeah. I just want to go back to about Sisterland just for 1 second. What is ocean tea? Why did you make that up?
Which word?
Ocean tea.
Ocean tea. Oh yeah.
Because I was wondering, and it's salty and.
Yes, I don't know. I just thought foods change, and I was trying to think of different things people might drink. I mean, who would have guessed that we would now pay €3 in Dublin for fancy coffees and go around with bottles of water the entire time? And like when I was a kid, you wanted fizzy drinks. Now fizzy drinks are evil.
Yeah.
So
did you picture what it was, or did you?
Yes,
yeah,
I
the
did.
flavor. Okay.
The foods. Yeah. I imagined ocean tea. I imagined all sorts of things. I imagined that pregnancy would not last 9 months.
I found that very curious. Yeah. How did you think about it? Who would
want to be pregnant for 9 months?
Exactly,
so therefore, I thought, well, maybe scientists have come up with a way of speeding it up.
Okay.
Why not?
So thanks very much for joining us, Martina. And let's go for a glass of wine and finish the experience of the festival.
They don't have ocean tea downstairs.
They don't have ocean tea. No, I'm afraid not.